the sort of social sort of situation at that time. There was a lot of real kind of sort of worry there. I mean, again, on this subject, there's been a lot of artists recently. There was an artist in Holland, in the Netherlands, who did a project using sort of images of girls photographing themselves in chat rooms. So there's been you could give a long lecture on sort of artists who sort of really followed that subject through, and it is something again that I think is very interesting. I mean, there was a report came out, I think, from the NSPCC on the use of teenagers' use of Tinder. And that's again another sort of aspect of that concern. I mean, and also, again, this was really reflected in people's attitudes towards sort of photographing children. I remember around about this time, I mean, this is another thing that I wanted to sort of mention with computer class. The way that I work is that I tend to sort of work through school authorities. I just find it much easier to make initial sort of approaches to the school authority, and then through the school, and then through the head teacher, and then through the teacher, and then through the parents, and then da-da-da. So, that's the route that I take. But I remember at that time, as a parent, being interested to note how you either were or weren't allowed to take photographs of your own children or others within that kind of school setting. And there's a whole graph you could plot, as to, that's interesting, but how you can use your camera in sort of public space. And that's something that, it is again very interesting, something that obviously if you work with children, you're very aware of that. It's slightly different in this setting, so I did do, there's a sociologist called Neil Postman who wrote a really interesting book called The Disappearance of Childhood, and he's written a lot about what he calls the two major institutions of childhood, and that's the school on the one hand, but the family on the other. And I did do quite a bit of work with one family in particular, and this was a family who lived in this madhouse, and I think it had been a hotel, hence the tartan carpet and the block wallpaper. And just look at, and that was obviously the same little boy sort of playing. And it was just interesting to sort of look at watch children play in that much more informal kind of sort of setting. And again, when I went to places like this, you weren't quite sure what you might find, but for me anyway, I always have sort of images in my head. And with this one, after I took this picture, I remembered this Stanley Spencer painting, The Centurion, which I really loved. And again, I think this is something that Marina Warner has written about or channeled through Paula Rego. So as well as working in schools, so that's again better to look at the screen, I also sort of looked at sort of children as they played in after school clubs. I often work really close to home, and I'm very interested in sort of trying to sort of use what's available within the immediate vicinity. And next to my studio there was, I used to pass this sort of high window. I used to look in and you used to see lots and lots of heads attached to huge speakers. And it was an after-school music club. And all these kids were learning keyboard, but there was no way that the teacher could cope with so many kids in a room. So I just thought it was a great image. These two brothers hooked up to, and also I think very much what I was feeling as well at the time, because I think I was becoming much more sort of engaged in the virtual world and on the internet, and much more connected. And there was something there resonating for me. Interestingly, I think it was a couple of years ago, was it Channel 4 again, phoned me up and said they had to write an image release because that image had appeared behind somebody who'd become a big kind of sort of DJing star that signed to Sony. And I immediately thought it was the big boy with blonde hair, but it was the little boy. It was called, I can't even remember what his name was. But I thought that was really interesting, because I mean, this was just an amateur music club. It wasn't like these, which is a school for gifted children, who were being taught by Yudi Menyon as their patron and blah de blah. These kids were just kids off the street who were doing whatever. So I think that's quite sweet. And it goes back to what I was saying about sort of the image of the child as a promise of futurity. I think that when you look at the child, it's like a tabula rasa, it's like a blank slate onto which we project our sort of desires, but it's always fantastic when you see these things happen. And again, I did a small series of of musicians, and again, this was 2000, and that was a very interesting time for music as well, because of what was happening to photography was also happening to music. And music was being sort of democratized in one way, but just changing. The way that people made music, and obviously distributed music, was changing rapidly. And I wanted to sort of look at that, and that was this was pre-Guitar Hero, pre all of these sort of digital games where kids make music in a very different way. So I thought it would be interesting to sort of shoot in, this was St Mary's Music School, and I did one of the pieces upstairs in that, this piece. And again, sorry, it's a dreadful reproduction, you can see it better on the screen. And I very much, I was sort of really thinking about that, thinking about how the way that we were making music in a digital world would change. So, again, very straightforward shot during lessons or rehearsal periods in the music school. But again, these were just sort of shot on film, on a Hasselblad, and drum scanned as really small files. I mean, I think that it's just very different now. I don't know, how many people are photographers here? Oh. Yeah, I mean, it's just a very, very different way of working. I mean, I think that, the editing process that it imposed on you was really quite radical, because drum scans were very, very expensive then. So to get a 40 megabyte drum scan done was like really expensive. So to invest in 2 drum scans was like, you had to be really sure that what you wanted to do was going to be of some interest and good. And of course that has a huge sort of impact on the way that you make work. And I'll talk a little bit, I've brought some other sort of young digital artists' work, I'll show a few more slides later, but I think that that's quite a huge thing. And when I'm working now, we obviously sort of shoot sort of totally digitally. Now, it's just a very different way of sort of constructing images, it just changes everything. I've straddled that kind of period between sort of the analog and the digital. This is one of my daughters actually. I did work a lot as well, and then the school work spilled over into other things, and I started to sort of shadow school children as they made their way around museums. I would often sort of photograph children especially in Victorian museums, and I was always very interested, like many photographers have been, in the taxidermy and sort of Victorian display. This sort of strange kind of space between the animate and the inanimate. I remember when I was watching school groups go around museums and looking at displays, I used to love them. I used to challenge guards and say, is that alive or dead? And it just used to always really interest me in the way that the guards would respond, because of course these things have been alive, but they're now dead. So children found it quite hard, and it's again this whole relationship with the animate, inanimate, and this goes back to play and the toy. I found very sort of compelling, and this was an image shot at the Museum of Childhood, which is a very strange museum in Edinburgh, which is really a museum about childhood for adults. These display units have gone now actually, and the museums have really changed. So for a long time actually I was very interested. I was trying to sort of capture these displays. This is perhaps one of the best known, again you can see it here but you can't see it there I'm afraid, one of the best known images from that series, Girl with Bears. And it's kind of typical of a lot of the work that I produced, and when I was shadowing school groups, there'd invariably be very large groups of children. But in post-production, I usually only left 1 or sometimes 2 of the children in. In this work, you can actually see 2 reflections in the one child. I remember this display. Again, this display is gone, but it was an absolutely fantastic display. I mean, bears are they're amazing things. I don't know if you've seen that, the documentary Grizzly Bear. Yeah, they're terrifying in the scale of them. And as a child, sort of, visiting these things, I mean, they're contained behind glass, right? It's a very interesting sort of space. And again, sort of I often worked with museums where drama sessions were taking place, and there was one drama specialist in particular who I loved to sort of follow around. And this was a workshop at the Museum of Flight on Percy Pilcher, who was the first aviator to try and fly without the aid of an engine and a glider, and of course he died. And I would often such as document the workshops. Or sometimes in school, again, you can't see that, so you have to look at the screen, on very sort of improvised sort of drama sessions with children shot into the corner of classrooms. It was interesting because I think that, over the years that I was doing this, provision of drama was really sort of cut back. And while ICT was really on the up, so there's lots more sort of PowerPoint sort of presentations being requested by young children, lots more computer classes. I noticed that art and drama was on the wane, and I thought that was something that I really wanted to sort of think about. This was again, sort of in 2000, this was part of a commission from the Science Museum and the Wellcome Institute. They asked me to come into the new biomedical gallery, the Who Am I gallery, and to sort of photograph children as they made their way around the exhibits. And this was a very interesting gallery because it was set up in 2000, but there were so many advances in sort of biomedical sort of research and science that 10 years later they had to almost completely sort of remodel the gallery. But I think this was a display in sort of genetic engineering, and very much a display that sort of harks back to sort of Victorian sort of models of display. There's an albino peacock there and the cat, which is very beautiful sort of displays. And this was a display on DNA. One of the girls we brought to see, I think this was her mother, was one of the curators, and there was a hank of hair that she was looking at in the case. I just really want to talk a little bit now about, in the context of this exhibition, and think about the popularity of childhood as a theme. This was a project that was put together by Exit, which was a Spanish publication, fantastic. I don't know if it's something that you've ever had the opportunity to see. They had their 10th anniversary in 2010, and they decided to make that issue about childhood. And as you can see from the text, there's quite a few. Julian Germain was in that. Robert Ballin, Sally Mann, Ralph Eugene Beatyard, Helen Van Veen. So many artists have worked in various ways with childhood as a theme over the years. And similarly, over the last sort of 10, 15 years, I've been in loads and loads of exhibitions and books that have taken that as its theme. I mean, they all do look at it in very different ways. I mean, obviously how we learn looks at kind of interdisciplinary practice. And there's no way that I would describe my practice as interdisciplinary. And then there's somebody like Roger Ballin, who would say is at the other end of the spectrum. So, I think it's really interesting to sort of look at the subject from all of its sort of facets.